Happy May, coaches. Wanted to touch base still this month. I know it's a very busy month for a lot of us, whether it's a GMIT, graduations, families, etc. So, nonetheless, wanted to still present a topic that's still relevant to all of us, regardless of gender and age. And with that being said, this one is inspired by Daniel Coyle. Um, the Culture Code. It just got my brain thinking a little bit. This is something I shared with the LA Surf staff, and I think it's relevant to the Fire FC staff. So let's dive into it, how we can create highly successful groups. Here's an idea to start off with. The most likely to survive are those who are adaptable to change, not the most intelligent or the strongest. And self organization processes in field invasion team sports we can learn a lot from nature. So I want to dig into that idea and how so, right? Think about a school of fish. Why do they swim in quote unquote a school? Well, here's a few bullet points for you. Did you know to better protect themselves from predators? Two, to improve searching for food. Three, improve the likelihood of their eggs surviving, and to swim more efficiently. So they don't just to do it. It's not a phenomenon of sorts to say, wow, that's cool, that's pointless. They do it for a reason. And think about how we can take some of these ideas. How can you take that and translate it into young adults that you work with youth that you work with? Here's something to steal from bees. Did you know this about bees? They work together to bridge gaps, i.e., the picture that's in front of you. When there's a large gap to cross and there's not room to fly, they'll festoon by connecting the hooks on their legs to form a link over spaces, making chains, like workmen on a scaffolding. They also keep each other warm and cool. They share where the food is. They don't keep information to themselves. They bathe each other. This attention to hygiene also helps them smell if something is wrong with baby bees and to remove dead bodies from the hive before they cause disease or other problems. And they care for the sick. If they care for the sick bees, they never do any other jobs because they could be contaminated. There's some fun facts for you regarding the bee world. What about birds? We all know they fly in a V formation. Why? What is the point of it? Well, it's 70% more efficient than flying by themselves. Did you know the second benefit to the V formation is that it's easier to keep track of each bird in the group? Flying information may assist with communication and coordination with the group as well. And pilots often use this formation for the exact same reason. So, something to be aware of, something to be mindful of. Again, how can we steal an idea, put a spin on it, and apply it to those we work with? You're free to choose the course you take, but the spearhead is most effective if you all work together, right? I think a very common idea that's relatable to any and all of us. Wolves. Here's something. Here's a fun reality when it comes to wolves and their packs. The first three are the older or sick ones. They set the pace for the group. Next are the five strongest in the group. In the center, follow the remaining members of the pack, and at the end of the group, the next five strongest. Last, by themselves, follows the alpha wolf. It controls everything from the rear. The pack follows the rhythm of the elders, and the head of the command imposes the spirit of mutual help, not leaving anyone behind. Sound familiar with regards to how we can take something from nature and apply it to those we work with? Again, just another example by the very things that surround us. Let's look at ants. Did you know that from a working together standpoint, the division of labor where different individuals specialize on different jobs, often depending on their age? Workers then decide which tasks to perform based on personal preferences, interactions with nestmates, and cues from the environment. Communication skills. Ants communicate mainly using chemicals, which they smell with their antenna. In addition, ants can also use touch and vibration to communicate in some situations. Problem solving together. Ant colonies solve difficult problems by processing information as a group. A solitary insect would not be able to weigh as many options. Survival, hunting, and farming are done collectively. And loyalty. Ants are very loyal to their own colony, but they can be very aggressive toward outsiders. Probably all of us have experienced that to some extent growing up as kids. Nonetheless, I think a lot of similarities with regards to groups that we work with. Again, how can maybe we steal this slide or this specific example and apply that with 10-year-olds, 13-year-olds, even teenagers for that matter, to take some of these concepts and say, did you know? What can we translate from nature and apply it to how we work. What becomes relevant? What is relevant? What do we need to be mindful of moving forward? Working together in harmony with others, science shows, makes it more likely we'll do good. Coordinating makes us better people, and being better people makes us better coordinators. If you don't have meaning, integration, and connect, over 95% is forgotten by your players. That was something that was told to me by Dr. Dan. He was a part of, I'm not sure if he currently still is, but was a part of US Soccer. Just a thing that I wrote down back when I took my B license, and something that's always stuck with me. How can we create an intentional environment where we have those things? We create meaning, right? We have purpose, we integrate not some players but all players, and we find ways to connect. Let's dig deeper into these ideas. Culture. Did you know the word comes from the Latin word cultus, which means care? Culture means care. Standards versus rules. Usually when you're ruled, you never agree with all the rules, you just abide by them. For those of us that have been in a certain working environment, maybe you've played in college, or beyond college, and there's rules that are set. You're just like, why is that even a rule? It's so stupid because not everybody follows it, right? But if you have standards and if everyone contributes to the way you're going to do things, you end up owning how you do things. Nobody's going to sink their own ship. If you have those conversations with your team about what standards do we want to hold ourselves accountable to, you start getting players to take part in the building of it versus being told, here's the rules for our team this year. Now all of a sudden it creates a different dynamic, right? That buy-in is it's just different, right? How they treat each other is at the top of the list. Biggest project is building and sustaining the group itself. If they get their own relationships right, everything else starts to follow. How do the kids talk to each other? Are you mindful of that as a coach? Are you mindful of that both on the field and off the field? Do those align, or do you let them get away with things with regards to how they treat each other on the field, versus off the field? Things to be mindful of as a coach. Gatherings, feelings of belonging boost job satisfaction and performance. Right? How can you create gatherings within your specific group that you work with? We're talking about creating the culture you want as a coach. How do you deal with someone who's not buying in? How do you integrate younger players into your team? How about new players maybe that just moved here, relocated to Grand Junction? If you could do things again, what would you do differently and how would you do those things differently? Just rhetorical questions to think about as a coach, and I would really suggest taking some time to do so you have a clear idea as to how you would answer those questions because I'm sure if you haven't crossed all of these yet, you definitely will. And if you already have, I think that last one is for you. If you could do things again, what would you do differently and how? Here's part 1 of creating a really good culture within your team. Build safety. You have to have trust to say, I'm not here to make fun of you and you're not here to make fun of me. But how do you then build that trust? Let's dig into it. How to create belonging. Regular gatherings with all the players. It doesn't have to be in person. Maybe it's exactly how I'm sharing information with you here, being a recorded meeting. I think ideally even a Zoom meeting because again, everybody's there at that point in time. But again, it doesn't have to be on the soccer field. Be creative as a coach and maybe just changing that dynamic in that environment still creates the engagement because it's something new, it's something different. Things to be mindful of. Smaller group get-togethers. I used to do functional trainings to where I would only work with the forwards from a certain time frame to a certain time frame. Only the midfielders, only the defenders. That's just one example. But think about how can you take that group of 16 and maybe work with them in groups of 5? Do you differentiate them by birth date? Do you differentiate them by size of player? Hey, I want to work out with all the tallest players, right? Again, you're just changing it and making it something new, something different. And now you're getting that crossover with players maybe that don't usually interact. Things to think about for how to create belonging. Clusters of high communicators. This means how close we work to one another, i.e., distances between desks in a school. Closeness helps create efficiencies and connection, or efficiencies of connection. So that's where Zoom maybe isn't the best because you can't, you're not physically there, right? So when you are presenting off the field topics, maybe whether it's a team dinner or maybe it's a video session, how close are you intentionally placing kids? Things to think through as a coach to create the best culture, not just good enough. Be mindful of when we're in this space and invite input, because that creates spaces that maximize collisions. Collisions meaning interactions, right? How do you maximize those interactions? Part two, share vulnerability. Such a big soft skill. I was talking about this topic with Sean briefly the other day in the soccer office. How do you work on those soft skills? Well, I think one of those soft skills is vulnerability. How do you work on that? Well, number one, I think we as coaches need to be the examples for what that looks like. What tough moment might you have had? Maybe it was a setback in a sport. Maybe it was losing someone close to you. Become vulnerable, but don't just ask for it from your players. Show them and model that through your behavior, through what experiences you've dealt with, to maybe then be relatable to them. Something to be mindful of when you're trying to build the culture that you want. Candid feedback. Where did we fail? What did each of us do and why did we do that? These are just examples of giving honest feedback, and it's tricky, right? Because it can easily result into people feeling hurt or demoralized if you say that wasn't good enough and I expected better of you. What did you expect better of? Like what specifically, right? What wasn't good enough? Aim for candor and avoid brutal honesty. Caring and candor, I think, go hand in hand. That's an and thing, not an or thing. You can be nice and give honest feedback. You don't have to be a jerk and give honest feedback, right? How you present that to someone can be more beneficial to them, and make sure they're the ones that are better for the words that you're telling them, not you as the giver of those words. I think too many people fall for that trick to say, well, I feel better because I was honest with them, but you made them feel like crap, right? Something to be mindful of as you're giving candor feedback. You could do it in a caring way. Vulnerability tends to spark cooperation and trust. Vulnerability is less about the sender and more about the receiver. The second person is the key. Do they pick it up and reveal their own weaknesses, or do they cover up and pretend they don't have any? Right? It makes a huge difference in the outcome. Things to be mindful of when it comes to sharing. Maybe it's I don't know, a personal situation. Maybe not everybody's comfortable sharing a personal situation, but for those that are, it's really the listeners that start hearing these examples that probably recognize and realize they're more relatable and like their teammates than they once thought, right? So, how can you create these vulnerable environments to allow people to share their experiences? Vulnerability doesn't come after trust, it precedes it. So you can't ask each other to trust each other, but you're never vulnerable and honest with each other, right? It's something that you have to plant the seeds before, and then that trust starts to build and grow off of that. Exchanging a vulnerability, we naturally tend to avoid, are the pathway through which trusting cooperation is built. Be mindful of that. Serve your coworkers, support, save, trust, listen. Those are things that they just add up over time, right? Things to think through, things to be aware of, and things, again, not just to just do with amongst us as a staff, things to communicate with your team so they're mindful of it. Creating cooperation in small groups. Spending time together outside, hanging out helps for sure. One of the best things is to put the group in something hard, i.e., a hard training, and maybe it's rainy, right? There's something about accomplishing something hard together, being wet and cold and miserable together. That makes a team come together, right? That's some of those intangibles that you're not sure exactly what happened, but you know we accomplished that as a group. Now we've got that. We were honest, we were vulnerable, we put ourselves out there, right? We pushed ourselves beyond the limit, and we did it together. Over communication, over communicate expectations. When forming new groups, focus on two critical moments. The first vulnerability, make sure you're very intentional with that one, but also the first disagreement. How again are players talking to each other, treating each other? That the way you handle that as a leader and a coach is going to set the precedence and the tone moving forward. Don't overlook those. Embrace the discomfort, not just you, but remind your players of that. That's how you create resiliency. You can't have resiliency unless you have setbacks, right? So be mindful to remind them to embrace that discomfort, right? And then align language with your action. It's one thing to say, hey guys, we need to push through the hard, and then they see you model how you deal with hard, and it doesn't reflect what we talked about the week prior, the month prior, right? Make sure we're aligning our language with our actions. Here's a little visual going from data to wisdom and how dots are connected. But one of the best measures of any group's culture is a learning velocity. How fast can a group learn? But remember, individuals learn, groups don't learn, right? But groups create a whole, or I'm sorry, individuals create a whole. How quickly it improves, it meaning the team, improves its performance of a new skill. That's really what we're after as a coach, right? So, framing, use new experiences as learning experiences. Mentioned that one prior. Roles, having roles given, and more importantly, the players knowing and understanding the importance of them is key. Rehearsal, work on specific tasks before they happen. I think most of us as coaches rehearse quite a bit, but again, it's not doing some of these, it's doing all of these, being intentional about it. Explicit encouragement to speak up. Leaders encourage others to speak up if they see a problem and coach through the feedback process, right? You can always help a player who's taking initiative after the fact. Maybe that's an individual conversation. Nonetheless, encourage your players to speak up and take initiative, right? I think I'd like to think I speak for all of us when I say we want those players that are willing to get outside their comfort zone to take those opportunities upon themselves. And maybe it's not perfect, so we help mold that, right? As a leader, again through that feedback loop. Active reflection. As a leader, go over your performances. I can remember that's something I did regularly to say that first training session off the weekend, take 5 or 10 minutes to talk about the game. What do we do well and why? What can we improve and how? Or maybe it's start, stop, and continue. What do we need to start doing? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to continue doing? Easy little activities that can facilitate 5 to 10 minutes, but you're reflecting purposely on the game you just played. Boom, now you move forward off of that. Discuss possible future ideas and suggestions for improvement, right? Just noted that with a couple of those examples. Part three, establish purpose. How do you establish purpose? I want to share a couple stories with you here briefly on these next two slides. A man observed three bricklayers on a scaffold, one crouched, one half standing, and one standing tall, working very hard and fast. He went up to the first bricklayer and asked a question: "What are you doing?" To which the bricklayer replied, "I'm a bricklayer. I'm working hard, laying bricks to feed my family." He then walked up to the second bricklayer farther down and asked the same questions. The second bricklayer responded, "I'm a builder. I'm building a wall." He then moved to the third bricklayer. He noticed he was the most productive of the three and asked the same question: "What are you doing?" He replied with a gleam in his eye, "I'm building a cathedral." So perspective matters. What is the purpose, right? What purpose are you creating as a coach? What is the perspective of your players? Do they see what you see? President John F. Kennedy was visiting NASA headquarters for the first time in 1961. While touring the facility, he introduced himself to a janitor who was mopping the floor and asked him what he did at NASA. The janitor replied, "I'm helping putting I'm helping put a man on the moon." What a cool response for someone who doesn't get that notoriety, um, yet he sees his purpose, right? And it's something bigger than what his title says that he is, right? Again, do your players see that when they don't have the captain armband, that they still have a leadership role, right? Do they understand that leaders are not just on the soccer field? And who might be a leader on the soccer field might not be a leader at home, or might not be a leader in the classroom, or might not be a leader in their friends group. And that's normal. Do our kids understand that? And do we have these conversations with our players about that? Things to think through, things to think about, and maybe future conversations to have with your players. Again, each of us are a part of something bigger than just our individual teams and areas we work in. We're responsible for creating the best experiences we can for and with those we work with. When we feel overwhelmed, isolated, or confused, I encourage each of us to follow the advice we give our own players. Reach out, ask for help, and continue to find solutions to problems. Stop giving good advice to your players and then you not follow your own advice, right? I think many people understandably might feel embarrassed. Um, but at the end of the day, asking for help shouldn't be an embarrassing thing. That should be a very noble thing, a very admirable trait, right? Because not enough people do it, especially adults. In the meantime, keep building on what you know and keep growing. Learning is the fuel to your improvement. Establishing purpose, getting back to that third piece to creating the culture that you want. Create high purpose environments in relation to two simple locators. Here's where we are, here's where we want to go. Having a reference that's simple and it's clear. Create epic experiences. Epic standing for experiential, participate, image driven, and connected. Pertaining to that image driven, did you know 90% of visual aids are retained and genuine connection happens in groups of three? Right? So when you're trying to think of ways to engage your group, and maybe you're struggling to come up with an online training session, be mindful that visuals are key to engaging and creating that just creating engagement overall that you are after as a coach, right? And kids are much more likely to remember that when you have those images to reflect on and to talk about, and beats what I'm doing right now, which is a lot of text, right? Be mindful of this too. When you're creating those small groups, the best connections happen in groups of three. That's a scientifically proven reality. So something to be mindful of as a coach when you're looking to put your teams in groups. Today's young adults are exposed to so much information before they're emotionally ready for it. So much info they're exposed to has minimal context. So I know I'm stating a fact here, but nonetheless, be mindful of that and facilitate those conversations. What might that mean when it comes to the social media space? How can you help? Yeah, maybe and hopefully you influence it, but nonetheless, at least have a conversation about it to say what is the best balance to get right. What do you already know that you wish you would have known at their age? How can you help facilitate some of those conversations when we know they're exposed to so much to help make sense of at least some of it, not all of it? What topics might you really want to tackle with your team because you're starting to get to know them better, right? Things to think about as a coach. Your influence can be bigger than you think it could be. How to lead for proficiency skills versus creative skills. People respond to what their coach feels is important. If you value the end result and you consistently talk about the process, they're going to pick up on what you're valuing versus what you're talking about because of what you model. Again, goes back to that old notion actions speak louder than words, right? Creating engagement around a clear, simple set of priorities can function as a lighthouse orienting behavior and providing a path toward a goal. Skills of proficiency are about doing a task the same way every single time. That consistency piece. So let's talk about the creative skills because, again, it's not an either or that we want to create, it's an and. How do you help players build their proficiency skills and creative skills? Creative skills are about empowering a group to do the hard work of building something that has ideally never even existed before, right? How do you get players to solve problems that they haven't had to solve before? You've got a team that's 10 years old. They haven't had to solve the problem of 9v9, or I'm sorry, they're 11 years old, U11. Now they're playing 9v9. They just came from 77. It's a different problem to solve, right? When they move to U13, now they're playing 11v11. They're trying to find new solutions to new problems, right? Things to be mindful of when you're putting them in groups and what you're trying to get out of that group. Most groups consist of a combination of these skill types as they aim for proficiency in certain areas and creativity in others. The key is to clearly identify these areas and tailor leadership accordingly. They aren't gentle suggestions so much as clear reminders, crisp nudges in the direction the group wants to go. So just be mindful again of when you say you want to be intentional, what does that mean and what are you going after? Unleash creativity. I inserted a link in the email. Take some time after we wrap up here with the last three slides. Watch this. It's like a minute long by Simon Sinek. Just an enlightening video to shed some light on unleashing our creativity. Ideas for action. So we've talked about what to do. Now it's okay, but how do I integrate that? What are some different ways to go about that? So in group relationships, again, look out and listen, observe. How do they treat each other? What are they saying? What's the body language like? And be mindful, be tapped into that as a coach versus just say, kids will be kids, right? How do you put them in situations to build those relationships, right? Things to be intentional about. If you know two kids don't get along, Do you never let them work together because of that? Or do you force them, and a better word, maybe challenge them to work together to overcome some of those things? And now the more I work with someone maybe I didn't know as well, I'm just like, dang, we have more in common than I thought we did, versus just letting them always stay apart and never getting to know that. Have a small handful of priorities, usually five or less, right? I think it's so easy for us adults because we understand things at such a more complex level in comparison to the kids that we work with. It's easy to bombard them with 7, 8, 9, 10 points. Keep it simple. And simple does not mean easy, right? And it's actually really hard because now you have to stay on track to say what two or three things do we want to really focus on. It's so easy to list off 12 and sound smart, and you've just really confused the kids, right? Be 10 times as clear about your process as you think you should be. Leaders are inherently biased to presume that everyone in the group sees things as they do, when in fact they don't. That's why it's necessary to drastically over communicate priorities. What are we about? Where are we headed? What are we doing right now? What's working? Right? Keep coming back to these things because even though it's the same question, you're in a different place. Think about it. That first weekend of games that you probably had, if you ask the question, what are we about? Or where are we headed? Or how did the weekend go? Those are different. Those are going to be answered differently in week 5 from week 1, and at the end of the season from week 5, right? So you've used the same question, but you're in a different place, in a different space mentally, and from a record standpoint and from a performance standpoint. So things to keep coming back to be consistent with as a coach versus feeling like you have to reinvent the wheel because you already asked that question. It's still relevant. Here are just some quotes and ideas that have stuck with me through time that I wanted to share with you as we wrap up. If a player lacks discipline or the ability to be creative, then they are put in positions that will ask those questions of them. Just an interesting idea, I thought, from a MK Dons coach there in England. One misconception about highly successful cultures is that they are happy, lighthearted places. They're not, right? Big misconception, something to be mindful of again as a coach, and something to share with your teams because I think a lot of kids assume those things. Oh, that team won the championship. It must be all great and gravy, and nobody pushes each other that much, and they just have a good time all the time. Not the case, right? These are good conversations to have and healthy conversations to have about what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that sound like? It's important to remember teams don't learn, individuals do. I mentioned that earlier in this presentation. Groups don't learn, right? Individuals in those groups learn, and they learn at different levels, which goes back to your challenge as a coach. How do you make a bunch of individuals a team? How do you focus on the individual development as you work on the collective development, right? It's that fine balance. Again, it's not a today I'll work on individual and tomorrow I'll work on the team. It's how do you do them both simultaneous or on the same day and integrate that versus isolate that. Members are oriented less around achieving happiness than around solving hard problems together. Again, put your teams in hard situations. Force them and challenge them to solve hard situations together. And now that vulnerability starts coming out, now that that trust starts getting built, but it doesn't get built by doing easy things. Last but not least, we talked about building the culture you want, but you don't get the culture you want, you get the culture you build. How intentional are you when it comes to having conversations on the field, off the field, throughout your season plan as a coach? How intentional are you to keep facilitating conversations, keep prodding and challenging individuals, small groups, the team as a whole? These are important things to think through because I think all of us as coaches want to be successful. Well, define successful. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to your team? So I'm going to get into some of those ideas a little bit more as this summer unfolds to lead into the fall season. Nonetheless, I hope you have some good takeaways on this one. Please take some time to, not even some time, 1 minute to watch that Simon Sinek link. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, per usual. Thank you guys for hopefully seeing this all the way through, and we will be on the field is my plan and intention here come June. So take care, guys. We'll see you.